What's up, Keller Williams Realty Partners, coming to you with another educational video. This is going to be the first video in a series of videos, probably I'd say anywhere between 3 and 5 videos about new construction. There are a couple of things that are important to point out here, especially if you're a new agent and you've never done one of these. The temptation might be to just refer this out to someone who's actually done it before. I can tell you when this came up for me when I was new, I'm so glad that I didn't do that. The amount of experience I got from that first new construction deal was incredible. And from then on, I've done, I think, several dozen since then in my career. And with each one, I learned more and more and more. They're all a little bit different, just like a resale. But the temptation, again, is probably going to be to refer that. I wouldn't do that. Let's work through it together. Let's try to get you paid. Let's try to get you helping your client, and let's stick with it. Secondly, there are going to be some negative answers to some of these questions. Again, this is going to be a multi-part, but about half of this series is going to be over the questions that I asked the new construction agent or the on-site agent, and the other half is going to be contract insights because they're very, very similar. So you might ask a question of the on-site agent that the buyer, your buyer that you're representing, doesn't like. More often than not, we're unable to negotiate those points. Not always, but not all. A lot of times we're unable to do anything about it. Your job is to ask the question and let the buyer know what's going on. You want to be the subject matter expert, and you want to be the one telling them, hey, this is what's going to happen here. Not much we can do about it, but you need to know about it. Okay. And again, as I mentioned earlier, the first part of this is questions that I have learned to ask through my many, many years of experience doing these. And these are the questions you want, and I can provide you with the sheet that I use. I put this in an email and send this to the new construction agent when we're thinking about or when we're about to go under contract. Some of them won't apply to every deal. You'll know which ones you can omit several of them that don't apply, but most of these will. And again, I'm going to be adding my experience with each one of these as we go. And the first one is, what does the deposit do to get started? This can vary widely. If you're dealing with a small builder that's building million-plus houses, they may require a huge down payment and may be completely non-refundable. If you're going to more of a traditional builder in let's say a $400,000 to $600,000 price range, let's say you're going to Meritage, they may only require $5,000 up front to get started, and they'll start that house. So it's important to point out also that any deposit they have is almost always held with the builder or the builder's escrow company or something like this. It's important to point out to your buyer that you have no control over that. If we're going to go buy a resale and their earnest money is $2,500, for example, that money generally gets deposited with Keller Williams Realty Partners. And if there's a dispute, Keller Williams looks at the contract and they distribute that deposit money or that earnest money appropriately. That isn't always the case with new construction. Just know that they are in complete control of that. Something that will probably never happen to you but could is if that company goes out of business, there may not be any recourse for your buyer. So it's important to know that any deposit given to get started or to put their name on a particular lot is in their control. Secondly, are all or half of the upgrades due up front? My experience is this: the lower the price range, the more money they're going to ask for if you decide to do some upgrades. So for example, let's just say throughout the first floor of the living area, minus the kitchen for example, let's say that it's all carpet, but your buyer decided they wanted hardwoods or laminates or whatever. And let's just say the upgrade was $10,000. So the builder doesn't have to eat that cost if the buyer walks away. They generally ask for anywhere between half or all of that money up front. So in this case, let's go with our example of $10,000. They may require $5,000 of that to be due up front, and they may require that be what's called hard earnest money or a hard deposit, meaning that money is non-refundable should the buyer walk away from the deal. And so it's important that buyers know that. Now, if you're talking about a maybe $700,000 home, something like this, they generally don't ask for as much up front. Sometimes they don't ask for anything if you decide to do some upgrading. Okay, and there's a million different upgrades you can do. You can do different cabinets, you can do different flooring, knobs, stuff like this. Usually what you have is a base package that might come with any new construction deal. Let's say you can choose from 3 different cabinets, or 3 different types of carpet, or 3 different types of flooring, and so on. And then there are upgrades from that you can choose to do. Some homes don't offer any upgrades at all. Some of them are very, very few. Changes of the elevation or the way the outside front looks, they don't maybe change those too often in your lower price range houses. Whereas if you're spending enough money, the sky's the limit. You can do whatever you want. It just depends on the deal. Third question. Is that half applied to the down payment? In my experience, it's almost always applied to the down payment. I could probably take this question out, but it'd probably be a good idea to ask that. Okay. Are there any lender or other incentives? Many times they are offering a lender incentive where it makes perfect sense for you to use the lender that they have on site. Sometimes it's the same company. Sometimes they're offering multi-thousands of dollars, tens of thousands of dollars in upgrades to use their lender. So they might do that in the form of, we'll give you $10,000 in upgrades, or a price reduction maybe, or it's usually in the form of closing costs. They don't like to mess with the asking price that much because it tends to hurt the comparables for future builds. Now, from time to time, they will be working with a lender that will give, let's just say, $5,000 or $10,000 in incentives. It's important for your buyer, though, to compare that with who their lender is. Let's say you're using Supreme Lending in the office, and they're offering $5,000 in incentives, and the rate is 5.5%. Well, you might go to Supreme and say, what kind of rebate can you give me for 5 or 6.5%? It may be the exact same as what the buyer is offering. Sometimes they do that through what's called yield spread, and sometimes there's no incentive at all. It just looks like there is, so you got to be careful with that. But more often than not, they're legit. Here's the one thing I'll say about using the in-house lender. You, as the buying agent, are completely off the hook for that side of that portion of the transaction. Meaning, it's not only is it out of your hands, but you're not going to really be held responsible for the lender. Whereas if you kind of might be if it is your preferred lender. So it's kind of a good and bad thing. You're not having to deal with that as much. Now, it's your job to keep up with that lender and make sure they're going to close on time. The other thing I'll say about that is the lenders usually work with these builders and they know their processes, and sometimes the transaction can go a lot smoother if you use their preferred lender. Just something to think about. But you always want to ask, are there any, whether it's a lender incentive or sometimes it's the seller's incentive. Sometimes they're saying, hey, look, if we get under contract and get started building by August 1st, we're going to give you another $10,000. It's a good idea. And they are very, very open to offering that to you. Okay. Are there lot premiums? You see this a lot. You want to know if this particular lot is the same as this particular lot. You might think, oh God, I love this floor plan, but I'd love to move over here on this side of the neighborhood instead. Well, there might be a good reason for that. If it's in a cul-de-sac, that lot or that house, depending on how you look at it, may be $10,000, $20,000, $25,000 more expensive. And finally, for this video, for the last question on this video, are the roads county or city, or will they be turned over to the county? I'm going to talk a little bit more about roads in a minute, but if you're in a smaller development where you have a smaller builder that's building 4 or 5 houses, it's a good idea to make sure your buyer knows whether or not they, as a community, are going to be responsible for those roads. Because let's say they stay there 10, 15 years and that road's all tore up. Sometimes the homeowners are responsible for that road. And you do want to ask the question up front, are the roads county or city now? And if they're not, will they be turned over to the county? It's a good idea to ask that question. And it's a good idea for the buyer to know whether or not they're going to be responsible for it. And one more note on roads. Will the roads be top paved at the end of construction? And do you have a bond for that? Some counties, maybe all now, require that they have a bond for the roads to be top paved. So for example, let's say you're in a big development, a big new construction development, and it's going to take multi-years to build out. I helped my buyers buy a new construction up in Dawsonville one time. They only stayed there for about 2.5 years, but they still had not top paved the roads by the time they moved out. And what I mean by top pave is what they'll usually do is they'll build usually a thin layer of asphalt throughout the neighborhood. A lot of times you'll have sewer pits that are sticking up from the road, manhole covers and things like this. And they're sticking up an inch, inch and a half from the road, and you always have to dodge them or run over them, and it messes your car up or whatever. You got to be careful with that. They do that because they don't want the final paving to be all tore up by cement trucks and construction trucks and all that sort of thing. So what usually happens is they'll put that very thin initial layer on, and when they're completely done with construction, they'll come and pour the final layer, so you've got a nice, clean, pretty street. Well, again, if it's in a big development, it's going to be built out for multiple years. Your buyers might want to be aware that that initial paving is going to be there for a while. And you also want to know whether or not they've got a bond for that, because if that company goes out of business or something like that happens, well, guess what? They're not going to spend the money at that point to top pave it because they don't have any, because the company doesn't exist anymore. So you do at least, and again, there's nothing you can do about this. You cannot require a new construction company to have a bond for it. And you can't require them to actually top pave it even though they've promised they're going to. But it's a good idea for your buyers to know about this. Okay? Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for the next video.